Of all games, gambling is the one that should be approached with the greatest caution. One can lose their head, risk everything, and lose. This often leads to a bad outcome. David was indeed addicted to gambling, but was this the real reason behind the tragedy that unfolded? David Nixon was a good-natured, ambitious, and positive person. He lived in the small town of Grapevine, Texas, USA. The man was in the business world and could sell anything to anyone. His first wife, Donna Lella, spoke only positively about him. They married in 1990, and a year later, the couple had a son. David began dealing in real estate, and it turned out to be a very promising profession for someone of his intellect. Gradually, he became the leading broker in town, closing deals worth millions of dollars. He enjoyed working with luxury estates in the wealthy suburbs north of Dallas the most. Their marriage broke down in 1995 after David had an affair with flight attendant Lisa Hill. However, he maintained a good relationship with his first wife, mainly because of their shared son, Nicholas. David married a new woman, but they divorced 2 years later. The man didn't stay single for long. Even before his divorce from Lisa was finalized, he met another woman, an attractive 27-year-old named Tracy Frame, who worked as an accountant. Tracy described David as charming and a very nice person to get along with. He met her at a time when Tracy had little interest in dating and relationships. The young woman ignored her admirer's advances for a long time, but he was very persistent, so she agreed to a date with him. After that, they began to build a romantic relationship. Soon, the couple moved into David's house to live together. Thus, David's probable third wife moved to Grapevine. Those close to him described the man as a great lover of exquisite and beautiful things, which he possessed in abundance. The desire for luxury goods, which sometimes didn't match his income, became a characteristic trait of David. Tracy didn't really care about his problems either, as the realtor always managed to get out of any unpleasant situation and continue living a social life. At the time of the events described, David's son was 11 years old. He simply idolized his father. According to the boy, David was reliable and never refused to help those close to him. The man communicated regularly with his son, took him out on weekends and during holidays, which helped them develop a strong bond. David was in the prime of his life when he suddenly became the victim of a tragic murder. But could his extravagant lifestyle, his risk-taking nature, and his financial troubles have been the reason for the incident? On April 18, 2002, a passerby noticed a fire late in the evening and called the fire department. When the firefighters managed to extinguish the blaze, they made a suspicious discovery, presumably a human body wrapped in something. The firefighters then alerted the police. In the middle of the night, an investigator from the local police department was called to the scene. It was David Nixon's new house in Grand Prairie, Texas, where the man had recently moved before the tragic event. The officer later recalled that he smelled the foul odor of burnt and charred flesh as he stepped out of his car in the driveway in front of the house. He discovered the body wrapped in multiple layers of fabric that were not completely burned. It was later found to be an electric blanket, a sturdy camping tarp, and a rope that held everything together. The investigator examined the body, which was in a terrible condition. He couldn't even definitively tell whether it was a man or a woman. However, based on the preserved facial features, the officer determined that the deceased was a fair-skinned man. The police officer called for backup, as handling the charred corpse delicately was impossible to do alone. It took several hours before the body could be carefully removed from the scene. During the on-site investigation, tire tracks and some fibrous materials were found that might have been used to start the fire. These were later identified as electric blankets. However, no other usable evidence was found to identify the suspect. The coroner conducted an analysis and determined that the deceased was a man in his early 40s who was killed by a single shot to the heart area. He was already dead before the fire started, making it a case of homicide. There were no signs of a struggle, so the experts assumed that the immediate death by a bullet surprised the victim, possibly while he was sleeping. During the first autopsy, the victim could not be identified, although investigators were confident that the deceased was the homeowner. Dental records were needed to identify the person. Based on these records, it was confirmed that the murdered man was indeed the 40-year-old realtor and gambling addict David Nixon. This event was a severe blow to the family of the deceased, especially to his son Nicholas. That day, the boy was supposed to call his father, but he got no answer. The teenager felt that something terrible might have happened, but he didn't know that his father was already dead at that time. From the beginning, police officers suspected that the victim's roommate might be the murderer. The couple's acquaintances said that they generally got along well, but there were occasional serious arguments about David's finances and gambling debts. In such moments, the situation would escalate, and everyone nearby would try to get away. The longer this tumultuous relationship lasted, the more Tracy accused her boyfriend of spending exorbitant amounts on gambling. He argued that it was none of her business. Their differences became more apparent in the spring of 2002, and after almost 4 years of being together, the couple decided to separate. However, this threatened to lead to a serious legal dispute due to tax issues, and out of fear of losing the house, David transferred it to Tracy to protect his property. When the issue of separation came up, Tracy wanted to keep the rights to David's fancy house with its covered terrace and heated pool. The man tried to resolve the matter with her and reclaim his property, but she refused to agree. On April 10th, the situation almost got out of control when David called the police to report that Tracy had changed the locks on his house without his knowledge. She had taken advantage of his absence when the realtor went on a business trip to a neighboring town. The police were able to mediate the dispute that same evening. After that, the two sat down, according to their statements, to negotiate a solution that would be favorable to both. Tracy claimed she had invested her own money in the renovation of the house, which is why she insisted she had the right to keep it. However, she couldn't prove the investment, and it was impossible to come to an agreement with her ex. Almost 2 weeks later, David was found murdered. All of this naturally appeared suspicious, since the man had no other conflicts with anyone else. It seemed quite likely that Tracy was involved in getting rid of her partner to keep the house. Moreover, it is usually the people closest to the victim who are involved in the murder. Tracy cooperated with the investigators. She wondered who could have killed David, but the victim's first wife had no doubts. On the very night she learned about her ex-husband's death, Donna went to the police station. She said that her ex-husband had recently feared for his life because of Tracy's inappropriate behavior. She handed over to the police his last will, as he had asked her to give them the name of his murderer should something happen to him. It was Tracy Frame. The man himself had never contacted the police when he faced domestic violence and downplayed the problems. But Donna knew everything and realized that David was in a dangerous situation when it came to the division of property. He had always tried to find an amicable solution to the dispute, but it seemed that his partner was provoking more conflicts. Donna called the police to her ex-husband's house when she learned that their son could not reach his father. Previously, she had called Tracy and tried to find out what might have happened, but Tracy brushed it off and said that she hadn't been keeping an eye on her ex-boyfriend, from whom she had already separated. In her opinion, he could be anywhere, perhaps drinking or gambling. She said that David had been hanging out with a group of friends during these days and was moving to a new house, which is why he had to stay in a hotel. According to her, he always traveled to Las Vegas over the weekends. This city became another possible destination for the search. Tracy assured Donna that he usually gambled and partied with call girls during this time. Despite the split, the couple, according to Tracy, still lived together for a while in the contested house in Grapevine. However, they had agreed that the man would soon move out. Just a few days before David was found dead, he was supposed to pack his things and move into a new house in Grand Prairie. According to Tracy's statement, the former lovers had discussed the moving plans. David had asked her to rent a moving truck to transport his belongings. She didn't let him down and called Penske to rent a special truck and a dolly to help load the items onto the truck. In the afternoon, David packed up his things and drove to his new address. Then, he intended to return to pick up the rest, but David never came back. Naturally, Tracy became a key witness for the investigators. Moreover, the resulting disagreement provided a strong motive for the crime. From the beginning, the investigators paid close attention to her, as it seemed that the young woman was the perfect candidate for the role of a suspect. During the first interrogation, when Tracy learned that David had been murdered, the investigators expected to see a grieving woman who needed comfort after the loss of a loved one, as is usually the case. However, her reaction was completely different from what the police had anticipated. She immediately asked how the body had been identified. The officers were troubled by this strange question. Later, however, Tracy emphasized that she had never asked such a question. The first meeting with the victim's girlfriend only heightened their suspicion of her. From that moment on, the investigators began to verify their assumptions. According to Tracy, they had a serious disagreement a few months before the man's death. With tears in her eyes, she said that she had lost a child the night before all of these events occurred, which only made the situation worse. It turned out that Tracy found out she was pregnant last fall. David was the father. This coincided with the moment when the couple's relationship began to fall apart. Additionally, her health problems were becoming apparent. For these reasons, the woman began to experience emotional difficulties. She realized it was not the right time to have a child and decided to terminate the pregnancy. Despite her own decision, she blamed David for the loss of the child, which presented a new motive. The woman expected a different reaction from her lover, support, but it turned out that he was indifferent to the situation. She claimed that instead of sympathy and support, she only received sarcastic comments. After hearing this, Tracy finally realized that she didn't want to be with such an insensitive and cruel man. It is noteworthy that the investigators couldn't find any evidence of Tracy's pregnancy, let alone any evidence of David's reaction. Everything was recorded solely based on her statements. The investigators closely observed the primary suspect during the initial interrogation. Afterward, every officer was unanimously convinced that Tracy was lying. According to the police officers, she gave evasive answers, was confused in her statements, and sometimes her body language clearly indicated deceit. Despite this, the woman continued to insist that she was not involved in the incident and had no idea about the circumstances of the murder. Since Tracy refused to confess, the investigators had no way to charge her. They had no evidence, so Tracy was simply released from the station. The crime scene was thoroughly examined, as was the storm drain, but a fire crew had already washed away most of the traces when extinguishing the fire. The only valuable clue was the tire tracks, which the police officers believed were identical to the treads of a Penske van that Tracy had rented for her ex. During the inspection of the storm drain, small footprints and fabric fibers similar to the materials David's body had been wrapped in were found. It appeared as if the murderer had tried to stuff the body into the drain but failed. Most witnesses described Tracy as a quarrelsome and aggressive woman. The reports about her were overwhelmingly negative, but that obviously wasn't enough to arrest and charge her. The police began checking video recordings from around the victim's residence. On the same day, a young woman who looked very similar to Tracy was filmed in front of a store near the house. Although the footage was blurry, the investigators were able to reconstruct the sequence of events using the video material. After reviewing dozens of hours of footage, the investigators found the same distinctive yellow Penske van that looked like a rental vehicle, which had also stopped near the victim's house. The van was later traced back to the driveway of the house. The next footage showed that 3 days after David's murder, someone parked a white Lexus, which resembled Tracy's car, in the parking lot. The footage again showed a woman walking along the front of the store, buying something, and then leaving. The employees of the Tom Thumb store revealed that she had bought cleaning supplies in large quantities, which looked very suspicious. The investigators recognized Tracy as the woman in the video and began communicating more persistently with her. Nevertheless, she continued to claim that she had nothing to do with the murder, and that all the documents found by the police were forged to frame her and close the case quickly. As an alibi, Tracy claimed that she was with her parents in Arlington during that time. However, it was impossible to find witnesses to confirm her presence in another city since her family had been out of town. The police officers needed more information to file charges. It was decided to obtain a search warrant for the primary suspect's home. According to the investigators, Tracy killed David in his sleep with a shot to the heart, which took place in the victim's home. The medical examiners believed that David didn't even have time to feel anything while he slept. It turned out that Tracy purchased a new mattress immediately after David's death, which confirmed the investigators' suspicions. It also seemed suspicious that the house was full of cleaning products, similar to those on the shopping list from the hardware store where Tracy had allegedly bought them. In the event of the man's death, Tracy stood to gain a tangible financial benefit in the form of the house. According to Donna, the house was the only reason for the murder. Tracy insisted that David's death would not bring her any income. She argued that she deserved David's house to be transferred to her. She claimed that there were no insurance policies on David in which she could have been a beneficiary, and since she was not formally married to the man, she could not make any other claims. It was suspected that the motive might not only be a financial issue, but also revenge for a broken relationship. Investigators believed that after the murder, Tracy used the yellow Penske van that she had allegedly rented to help David move. It was likely that this had been planned from the beginning to mislead the investigation. The detectives thought that the murderer used the van to transport the body, strapping the deceased to a dolly with belts, then drove to the location of the new house David wanted to move into. Here, fibers were found that suggested Tracy tried to dispose of David by dumping the body in a storm drain, but she obviously failed. She likely left him on the property and returned 2 days later to finish what she had started. During this time, she was recorded several times on surveillance cameras. She apparently decided to destroy the evidence by burning the body in a fire. Tracy likely wanted to ensure that David's remains would burn to ashes, wrapping the body in multiple layers of tarps and electric blankets. Unfortunately for the killer, a passing driver noticed the fire and called the fire department. If Tracy's plan had succeeded and no one had noticed the fire, she could have disposed of the charred remains in a sewer. Due to a mishap, this was not possible. The day after a second visit to the police station, the woman was arrested and charged with the murder of David Nixon. During an initial hearing, the judge released the accused on bail. She was equipped with an electronic tracking device that allowed her to move around freely until the hearing on the murder charges. Although all of David's friends and acquaintances were convinced of his ex-girlfriend's guilt, she had many defenders. The most committed of them was Roland Taylor. The man was a local dentist and a neighbor of the couple. He was born in the United Kingdom, but later moved to Texas and settled there. Roland and Tracy had been friends for a long time. He had already heard some accusations against the woman, but was sure that Tracy was the exact opposite of what the critics described. The man remained convinced that David had many enemies due to his gambling debts who might have wanted to kill him. David not only owed money to many people, but it seemed that he had no intention of stopping. The deceased spent enormous sums in casinos and on escorts. Against this background, it was, of course, worthwhile to look for other potential suspects who had a motive. Upon investigation, however, it was found that the deceased had no debts. Sometimes he borrowed sums, lost them in the casino, and then paid off his creditors promptly. Therefore, this version proved to be unsustainable. The active stance of the defense led to speculation that the pair had an affair after Tracy was released on bail. Later, Roland and Tracy got engaged. The man was ready to do anything to defend the justice and freedom of the woman he loved. He helped her find a decent lawyer, and with his help, Tracy hired an attorney in 2005. He turned out to be an experienced criminal defense attorney, although he had only handled 3 murder cases. Nonetheless, he was confident that the prosecutors only had circumstantial evidence and that it would be easy for him to secure an acquittal for his client. In the attorney's opinion, she was arrested within the first 36 hours of the investigation, which was too short a time to thoroughly examine all potential suspects in the case and adequately assess their likely involvement. Only a criminal caught red-handed at the crime scene, for instance, with a weapon in hand, could be arrested so quickly. That was not the case here. Normally, investigators need more time to check and narrow down possible suspects. The defense attorney saw this as a clear attempt to close the case as quickly as possible and place the responsibility for the crime on the first suspect they could find. Moreover, according to him, the prosecution had no direct evidence of her involvement in the murder. No traces of Tracy's DNA or fingerprints were found either in the house or in the van. No murder weapon, presumably a pistol, was found either. The prosecution relied on the statements of some of the people questioned, who were convinced of Tracy's guilt from the outset due to their conflicts with the deceased. Their relationship had been so turbulent that David had obtained a restraining order against his ex shortly before his death, and they had no contact with each other, even though they lived in the same house. Against this background, her story about David asking her for help with the move sounded strange. People close to him said that the man tried to avoid his ex more. The lawyer knew that the police had a video of his client's interrogation and requested a copy. After reviewing the material, the defense attorney was convinced that the police had used one of their interrogation techniques to put pressure on the suspect and get the answers they wanted. The defense insisted that everything had been planned from the start to make Tracy look bad. One of the prosecutor's strongest pieces of evidence was the surveillance footage showing Tracy leaving her white Lexus, getting into a rented van, and then shopping for cleaning supplies at a store near the crime scene. After speaking with the store's employees, it was possible to obtain the receipts for the purchases made by the woman captured on the footage. The shopper used a loyalty card to get a discount, and the card was registered in the suspect's name, saving her 19 cents. Tracy claimed that she couldn't remember the existence of such a card and emphasized that under no circumstances would she leave such a trail if she intended to move unnoticed through the city. The woman was convinced that she was being framed. The investigators matched the cleaning supplies found during the house search and were confident that these items were the same ones purchased at the hardware store. The defense lawyer presented several theories that could explain David's death. It was speculated that he might have been the victim of a robbery, or that the attack could have been a carefully planned act of revenge, targeting the gambling-addicted realtor because of his debts. In the lawyer's opinion, other potential killers were more suitable suspects than Tracy. The defense believed that Jerry Vauville, a longtime friend of David's, could be involved in the case. They had vacationed together at the lake house, and he was a frequent visitor to their home and knew Tracy well. According to the woman, Jerry had borrowed money from David and didn't want to pay it back, which could be a motive for murder. The police decided to investigate the man. Jerry immediately understood Tracy's attempt to shift the blame onto him since he was an easy target due to his close relationship with the victim. He admitted that he had occasionally borrowed money from David, but he refused to admit any involvement in the case. According to the man, Jerry was in the business of selling used cars. 2 months before the tragedy, he needed money and asked his friend David for a large sum, which David didn't refuse. After Christmas, however, Jerry repaid the entire amount. Jerry and David had planned to meet on the night of his disappearance. According to Jerry, David wanted to buy a new boat. Jerry confessed that they were supposed to go out for a drink that day to celebrate the long-awaited purchase. The last time he heard David's voice was on the morning of the day he disappeared, when the friends spoke on the phone and set a time to meet. Unfortunately, David never showed up and didn't answer his phone again. It wasn't until later that his friend realized what had really happened. The lawyer knew from Tracy that David had planned to bring $25,000 in cash that day to meet his friend because he was ready to buy the boat on the spot. Jerry insisted that he hadn't seen David that day and that there were no further debts between them, so he had no motive to commit the crime. After this lid didn't pan out, Tracy pointed to another possible killer, who turned out to be the victim's first wife, Donna. Just 2 months before his death, David took out an insurance policy worth $500,000 and named his son as the primary beneficiary, with Donna as the secondary beneficiary, since the boy was still too young at that time. The deceased's ex-wife received the payout for his death. Tracy herself was not mentioned in any of these policies, which suggested that Donna benefited from her ex-husband's death. Nonetheless, Donna received a very modest sum after his death, about $50,000, to take care of their son. She considered it absurd to call this a motive for such a brutal crime, since David would have paid her more in child support every month while he was alive. The deceased's son, Nicholas, also insisted from the beginning that only Tracy could have killed his father. He had repeatedly witnessed their rather violent arguments and was certain that it was always Tracy who provoked them. The defense attorney continued to argue that the prosecution had no real evidence against Tracy and that the police hadn't seriously investigated the possible involvement of other people. More than 3 years had passed since David's murder, and now Tracy was finally going to stand trial. Along with her lawyer, she was confident, as they didn't take the prosecution's arguments seriously. The prosecution, on the other hand, believed there could be no doubt about Tracy's involvement. She was an unstable and aggressive woman who didn't even need a motive to kill someone. However, a motive in the form of a house was a compelling argument, as the man could challenge the reinstatement of the house in Tracy's name and reclaim the property. Dentist Roland Taylor, the accused's fiancé, continued to insist that the court was wrong and was about to prosecute the wrong person. He was convinced of her innocence and believed that the loyalty card with Tracy's name had been deliberately stolen to incriminate her. The defense attorney continued to argue that the prosecution had no forensic evidence. There were no witnesses, and the murder weapon had not yet been found. The defense lawyer was confident that the case file would not even be sufficient to substantiate the charges. Tracy believed that the incident was a calculated revenge scheme and insisted that she was being wrongfully accused and that the real culprit would never be found. In her opinion, the investigators simply did not dig deep enough into the case. But the prosecutor also had valuable information. According to the deceased's son, Nicholas, his father kept a gun in a safe in the bedroom of the house where the man lived with Tracy. The investigators were never able to locate the weapon to conduct a ballistic test. The son believed that the suspect had access to the safe used the gun, and then disposed of it. Tracy, however, maintained that David never kept a weapon on the premises, at least none that she had seen. At the same time, she could not explain why she had bought a new mattress right after her ex's death. The reason seemed quite obvious. The old mattress had become a crime scene that couldn't be cleaned of blood anymore. The prosecution's arguments were supported by witnesses, particularly the store employees, who identified Tracy as the woman who had visited the store that day and purchased a large quantity of cleaning supplies, which could have been used to clean up blood. She even asked the staff in the household chemicals department what would effectively remove bloodstains from a carpet. They recommended hydrochloric acid, which was unavailable, so they suggested ordering the product online. She bought other items as well. During a subsequent search, all the purchased items were found in the house where Tracy lived. The prosecution argued that this allowed the pieces of the puzzle to come together into a coherent whole. The defense made another attempt to portray Donna as the likely murderer, arguing that she had a strong motive. However, Nicholas's mother received too little, only $50,000, to seriously consider committing such a crime. They also tried to pin the blame on David's second wife, Lisa, as a possible suspect. A thorough investigation was conducted to see if Donna and Lisa were involved in the murder. Phone data and geographic movements were analyzed. Ultimately, they could not be connected to the crime in any way. Additionally, Donna and Lisa had good relationships with their ex-husband, which was confirmed by many people, and they both had solid alibis. Lisa seemed to have no motive for the murder whatsoever. At the end of the hearing, Tracy felt less confident. She stated, "I don't believe in justice anymore. I don't know how I will feel afterward." The trial lasted 2 weeks, and the jury found the ex-wife of the deceased guilty. The decision was reached in less than 4 hours, and the woman was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The outcome completely satisfied the victim's family, and most breathed a sigh of relief, except for Roland Taylor. He remained loyal to his fiancée, continued to insist on her innocence, and visited her in prison. Tracy, with his help, filed an appeal, which was ultimately rejected. She will be eligible for parole in 2024, at which point she will be 55 years old. Roland still visits Tracy every weekend in prison. Thank you for watching, and take care.
This case took place in Mexico. Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco was a young, attractive woman who loved sports and staying fit. She paid such close attention to her appearance and devoted a great deal of time to her physical well-being. Maria loved going to the beach and sunbathing in order to maintain her enviable tan. She had a light golden complexion, black hair, sensual full lips, and deep-set eyes. The young woman followed in the footsteps of her father, the renowned Mexican psychiatrist Alberto Eduardo Isidro Lafuente Grimaldi. According to available information, Maria always greatly admired her father and the work to which he had dedicated his life. This was the main reason why she decided to study psychology. After completing her studies, Maria focused on working with adolescents and young adults who suffered from specific problems such as anxiety, depression, or other behavioral disorders. Her private practice was located on Calle Tlacotalpan in the Roma neighborhood of Mexico City. After the end of her last serious relationship, Maria wanted to find love and start a new life. Her relationship with her ex-husband had been truly strained. Of course, there were specific reasons for this. In 2011, the woman entered the criminal record after attacking her ex-husband in his own apartment. According to the man whose name was not publicly released, he went to visit Maria and their children some after their separation. At the door, his ex-wife asked him to go into the living room and sit on the sofa, which was covered with a strange plastic sheet. At first, the man refused. However, Maria insisted, saying that the children had prepared a surprise for him. Using this pretext, she eventually persuaded her ex-husband to sit down and put on a blindfold. After a few minutes, he could no longer hear her voice and realized that something sinister was happening. A few seconds later, he heard footsteps approaching. At that same moment, the man felt a sharp blow to the head from a hard object. It turned out that Maria had struck him with a fireplace tool. The man immediately removed the blindfold and tried to calm his ex-wife down, but she continued her attack. The woman took a knife from the kitchen and skillfully slashed the man, first in the stomach and then in the back. He now understood the purpose of the plastic sheeting on the sofa. The stunned man tried to wrest the knife away from her, but she bit him several times. Maria then attempted to inject her ex-husband with something, but he resisted even more fiercely. Finally, the injured man managed to push his attacker away and escape from the apartment. The former couple's children, who had already witnessed several violent arguments between their parents, were once again confronted with traumatic events. The man, who had miraculously survived, decided that Maria had gone too far this time. He contacted the police and filed a complaint against her. The attacker was subsequently charged with attempted murder. Soon afterward, Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco was taken to the city jail, and the judge issued an official arrest warrant against her. Later, the crime was reclassified as attempted murder under mitigating circumstances. On June 14, 2012, the young woman was sentenced to 1 year and 4 months in prison. However, Maria and her lawyers quickly appealed the verdict and obtained a modification of the original sentence. Instead, she was ordered to pay a fine and compensation for the victim's material damages. The total amount the woman had to pay to the state and to the victim was just over $3,000. Despite these apparent advantages, Maria's lawyers, like Maria herself, were dissatisfied with the court's ruling. They argued that their client had acted solely in self-defense because her former husband had allegedly beaten her regularly in the past. In this context, the lawyers filed another appeal, which was soon reviewed by the judges of the Mexican Criminal Court. As a result, the court overturned all previously binding verdicts. After her release, Maria returned to her normal life as if nothing had happened and continued her private psychological counseling. The image she had artificially created as a victim who had overcome gender-based violence from her husband only worked to her advantage. Later, she met a 41-year-old businessman named Alan Carrera Cuellar. Alan was the son of Adrián Carrera Fuentes, the former director of the now-defunct Mexican Federal Judicial Police. His father had a long and successful career in law enforcement. As the head of various government agencies, Adrián founded several companies. These companies specialized primarily in the sale of building materials and tiles. Although Adrián's business was legal, he had fairly close ties to the criminal underworld. For this reason, he was removed from his position and eventually brought to trial. Adrián was accused of having direct links to the Juarez Cartel, one of the largest Mexican criminal organizations involved in the illegal trafficking of illicit substances and other criminal activities. In fact, this cartel controlled a significant portion of the illegal drug trade from Mexico to the United States. Amado Carrillo Fuentes, also known as the Lord of the Skies, died in 1997 in a Mexico City hospital during extensive plastic surgery intended to alter his appearance. Given Adrian's close ties to various underworld figures and the evidence gathered against him, it was expected that he would spend at least 20 years in prison. However, he managed to provide crucial information to the authorities and later entered the Witness Protection Program as part of the Mexican Attorney General's investigation into the Juarez cartel. As a result, Alan's father was fully acquitted and released from prison in the summer of 2000. After his release, he devoted himself to his family and to building his business. These events are particularly significant because they directly or indirectly affected Alan's life. Meanwhile, Alan himself joined the successful family business and took over the management of the building material and tile factories founded by his father. This position not only provided him with a good income, but also gave him considerable free time. Previously, Alan had been in a committed relationship, which resulted in the birth of his daughter. However, he divorced his wife in early 2011. The separation led to withdrawal, depression, self-isolation, and alcoholism. As a result, he decided to seek psychotherapy and began seeing Alberto, Maria's father. At the same time, his teenage daughter from a previous relationship also began working with a therapist in order to learn how to cope with the emotions connected to her parents' separation. That therapist was Maria. Alan regularly accompanied his daughter to her appointments, and after the third session, Maria asked the girl to introduce her to her father. She explained that she wanted to meet him in order to make better progress in therapy. At first glance, this request seemed purely professional. In reality, however, the woman wanted to get to know the man for personal reasons. Eventually, a romantic relationship developed between Alan and Maria. When the teenager found out, she flew into a rage and stopped attending her sessions with the psychologist. The Perfect Advent Gift, available on Amazon. Link in the description. Maria, in turn, revealed her cruel nature and threatened to end the girl's life if she resisted her father's new romance. After a few weeks, what had begun with a few romantic dates and walks culminated in an official marriage proposal from Alan. The man decided to start a new life with Maria, unaware of what lay ahead and of who she truly was. One weekend in April 2014, he visited his family and introduced his new love as his future bride. Alan said they would legalize their relationship within a week. Maria even mentioned that she was apparently pregnant. The wedding took place on the scheduled day, but none of Alan's relatives were present at the ceremony. The reason for their absence was that they simply had not been invited, as they had been told it was a private ceremony. After a few months of dating, the newlyweds' family idyll came to an abrupt end. The frequent conflicts were mainly caused by Maria's distrust of her husband, who was a rather reserved person. At one point, the woman secretly accessed her husband's cell phone and allegedly found several compromising messages indicating that he was having an affair. The woman refused to accept her husband's possible infidelity, but dissolving the official relationship through divorce was out of the question. She chose a different way to solve the problem, to get rid of her husband once and for all. From that moment on, Maria began to devise a plan, carefully considering each step. Meanwhile, Alan seemed unaware of the true extent of the conflict with his wife and continued his daily activities, spending time with his loved ones. He maintained regular contact with his friends and relatives, even though they, to say the least, disapproved of his relationship with Maria. After some time, however, the usual dynamic of Alan's communication with his family changed. This happened in early November 2014. He began communicating only with his daughter, and even those text messages were written in a very strange and uncharacteristic style. He usually preferred audio messages. To everyone's surprise, he also stopped showing up at work and at his parents' house. On November 5, 2014, Maria coldly and deliberately put her plan into action. After work, she waited for her husband and kindly handed him a glass containing a psychotropic drug commonly used to treat depression and other disorders. Due to its sedative effect, this prescription medications caused drowsiness and difficulty moving. After confirming that her husband was asleep, Maria took the sharpest knife from the kitchen and, without any pity, plunged it into the helpless Alan's stomach. She then watched as he took his last breath. The next step was to dispose of the body. With some difficulty, she placed her husband's bulky and heavy body on the floor and cut it into pieces with a standard electric saw. She then placed the remains into plastic garbage bags. In one bag, she put the man's torso, and in another, the remains of his limbs. Finally, Maria placed the remains in a red suitcase to make them easier to transport. The body parts that could be used to identify the victim, such as the head, feet, and hands, she placed in a separate bag and stored in the freezer in her kitchen. After the young woman managed to clean the apartment, she approached the security guards of the private residential complex and asked them to help her load the suitcase into her van. This request, like every other, was recorded in the observation log according to the complex's regulations. The security guards noticed that the woman was extremely nervous and kept looking around frantically. Therefore, they asked her what was inside the suitcase. Maria replied that it contained various surgical instruments belonging to her father and that she needed to take them to the hospital because she was seriously ill and her father wanted to perform emergency surgery. Finally, the woman left the residential complex and drove into the city to scatter the bags containing her former husband's remains. When she returned home the next morning, she changed the locks on the doors and informed security that she and Alan were leaving on a business trip. The following day, the police first discovered a human torso without a head or upper limbs, and then additional human remains, which were soon taken to the Institute of Forensic Medicine. The distance between the locations of the first and second discoveries was considerable. This explained why Maria had not returned home for such a long time that morning. During the day, experts determined that the body parts belonged to one person, whose identity could not yet be established. Meanwhile, in order to avoid arousing suspicion among his friends and relatives, Maria used her deceased husband's phone. She skillfully answered all incoming messages, whether they were business emails or ordinary questions such as, "How are you?" The deceased man's relatives and daughter received numerous messages in which he allegedly wrote that he regretted his marriage. Other blatantly contradictory messages stated that he was enjoying being alone, while others said that he was traveling. This allowed Maria to buy time and devise a plan that would enable her to escape unharmed, just as she had after the attack on her first husband. At the same time, Alberto Eduardo Isidro Lacente Grimaldi, Maria's father, began calling Adrian Carrera Fuentes, Alan's father, asking whether he knew anything about the whereabouts of his daughter, whom he claimed he had been unable to locate for several days. Later, Alberto called Alan's parents again and informed them that he had found his daughter and that she was at the National Institute of Psychiatry, having fallen into a severe depression because of Alan's alleged infidelity. Almost the entire month of November passed in this web of lies. In December, Alan's parents decided to visit him at home. However, Maria dissuaded them, saying that she and her husband were taking a spontaneous vacation. This version of events did not sit well with Alan's parents at all, because Alberto had recently told them by phone that his daughter was receiving psychiatric treatment. Finally, the concerned family contacted the police and reported Alan missing. Within just a few days, the authorities were able to establish a match between the missing man's anthropometric data and the previously discovered human remains. An identification was then carried out, and Alan's relatives recognized him from the body parts that had been found. The police then decided to search the couple's apartment. Upon arrival, they found Maria, who, according to the available information, was supposed to be either on vacation or in a psychiatric hospital. The investigators arrested the woman and immediately took her to the police station, armed with a search warrant. They thoroughly searched the apartment and eventually found the deceased man's head, hands, and feet, as well as an electric saw. Among other things, the experts discovered smeared bloodstains during their examination of the bedroom and bathroom. They also noticed that part of the carpet in the bedroom was missing. Apparently, the victim's body had been on this missing piece of carpet at the time of the murder. At first, she had appeared in the case as a witness. However, because her statements were constantly confused and contradictory, she became the prime suspect. The investigation soon revealed that she was the one who had sent messages from her husband's phone after his death, so that his relatives would believe he was still alive and would not file a police report. The woman, for her part, claimed that she had not heard from Alan and had not seen him for several days. Maria used her status as a psychologist and obtained a form stating that she had been receiving treatment at a psychiatric clinic on the day of her husband's disappearance. With the help of all the relevant evidence gathered in the couple's apartment, as well as the testimony of security personnel, investigators were able to establish a clear link between Maria's actions and the brutal murder of her husband. Furthermore, Alan's daughter testified that the psychologist had threatened to harm her if she interfered in the relationship between her father and Maria. Although Maria intended to have herself committed to a psychiatric hospital in order to evade responsibility once again, experts confirmed that she did not suffer from any mental illness. Finally cornered by the evidence, Maria confessed to her husband's murder, justifying it by claiming that Alan had constantly beaten her. On December 10, 2014, the acting presiding judge of the criminal court issued a formal arrest warrant for Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco on charges of premeditated murder. She was then transferred to a social rehabilitation center to await trial. From that point on, information surfaced that made it possible to accuse Maria of further violent acts resulting in death. For example, it was reported that the defendant may have committed another serious crime in 2012, which had remained unsolved until then. That year, A bucket containing a human hand and a head was found near the family home where she lived. Among other things, investigators suspected that Maria's father, Alberto Eduardo Isidro Lafuente Grimaldi, may have been involved, not only protecting his daughter, but also helping her plan her husband's murder and evade responsibility. Authorities assumed that the man might have had a financial motive, as Alberto had lost part of his fortune in recent years. Nevertheless, the Mexican justice system took no decisive action and did not initiate an investigation against him. On September 5, 2022, after 8 years in a social rehabilitation facility, the Mexico City Attorney General's office announced the final sentence. Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco was ultimately sentenced to 46 years and 6 months in prison for aggravated homicide by reason of kinship and for crimes against respect for corpses or human remains. She was also denied alternative penalties and conditional suspension of the sentence. Maria was also ordered to pay compensation for the damages caused to the family. Such a sentence was exceptionally harsh by the standards of modern Mexican justice. Thank you for watching, and take care. In June 2013, Arizona was suffering through its usual summer heat. 19-year-old college student Adrienne Celeste Salinas left her rented apartment and disappeared without a trace. The day before, she had argued with her boyfriend, been involved in a car accident, and tried to call a taxi. After that moment, there was no sign of her. She had no money and no identification with her. Her family raised the alarm. The police launched an investigation. Volunteers joined the search. Week after week, however, the search brought no results, and only a devastating summer storm uncovered something that had been hidden for a long time. But even that discovery gave no answers. It only raised more questions. Adrienne Celeste Salinas was born on November 5, 1993, in Arizona. She was the first child of Rick and Pauline Salinas. 2 years later, the couple had a son, whom they named Nathaniel. The family lived a normal life until Pauline was diagnosed with a serious illness. After several years of treatment and fighting for her health, she died. At that time, Adrienne was 5 years old, and her brother was 3. After his wife's death, Rick was left alone with 2 young children. He continued working, while also raising them. His role was not only to provide for the family financially, but also to give the children his full attention so they would not feel neglected. All household and parenting responsibilities fell solely on his shoulders. Rick worked for a local company and also coached at the school his children attended. This allowed him to earn more money and spend more time with his children. He coached the school soccer team his son played on, and he led the volleyball lessons Adrienne attended. The father and children were very close. They discussed all kinds of things with him, shared their experiences, and asked him for advice. He was the most reliable person in their lives. From a young age, Adrienne was friendly and outgoing. She found it easy to start conversations with other people. She always had many friends, and people appreciated her sincerity, helpfulness, and easygoing nature. Adrienne was striking in appearance. She was attractive, with a distinctive look and a slim figure, and she often drew the attention of the opposite sex. At the age of 10, Adrienne met Francisco Arteaga, a student 1 year older than her. They immediately got along, began talking often and quickly became close. Their friendship gradually developed into a romantic relationship. For Adrian, these were her first strong feelings. Among their friends, they were seen as a couple. Francisco was the first young man with whom Adrian had a close relationship. However, he did not acknowledge any serious commitment between them. He said he was still too young, that he was not ready for responsibility, and that he did not want to settle down. He did not hide his contact with other girls. He would have brief affairs and then return to Adrian without explanation. He did not talk about his behavior, did not apologize, and made no promises for the future. Nevertheless, their relationship continued, and they stayed in contact. Adrian did not make scenes or show jealousy. She hoped that Francisco would eventually change. She remained loyal, believing that he would understand the importance of their relationship. Later, it seemed as if Francisco had become more serious, but that confidence proved to be false. Even during her school years, Adrian had decided that she wanted to become a journalist. After graduating, she enrolled in college and studied with the dream of entering television journalism and public relations. Although she lived in Arizona, she decided to live on her own and moved into a rented apartment in a quiet neighborhood. She shared the apartment with two friends. They had known each other well, trusted one another, and each had her own room, which allowed them to live together comfortably without disturbing one another. Rick had no objection to his daughter moving out, especially because she did not live far away, only about a 20-minute drive from home. They stayed in regular contact, spoke often on the phone, and visited each other. For her 18th birthday, her father gave Adrian a car, which made getting around easier and made trips home more comfortable. She found studying easy and enjoyed student life. But during her second semester, Adrian developed a persistent cough that would not go away. She thought it was only a common cold and initially tried to treat it herself without seeing a doctor. Her condition worsened. The cough became stronger. She had difficulty breathing, and the symptoms continued day and night. Finally, she became so ill that she had to be hospitalized. There, doctors diagnosed her with a severe fungal infection of the lungs, commonly known in Arizona as valley fever. The illness was already far advanced, so doctors decided on emergency surgery. Most of the affected part of her left lung was removed. Despite the seriousness of the diagnosis, her recovery was rapid. After a month, Adrian was discharged home, where she continued her rehabilitation. After a few more weeks, she returned to her studies and caught up on the missed lectures without any major problems. On June 14, 2013, the girls who lived with Adrian in the apartment decided to throw a birthday party for one of their friends. About 40 guests came, including Francisco. But according to those who attended, Adrian spent most of the time in her room and barely spoke to the others. The reason was the recent tension in her relationship with Francisco. He had begun openly flirting with another girl, ignoring Adrian's presence. Although she had remained faithful to him and had never allowed herself to flirt with other men, Francisco continued to insist that he did not want a serious relationship. He explained that he was not ready for commitment. Soon, a conflict broke out between them. After the argument, Adrian locked herself in her room. Later, Francisco came to her door. They spoke privately, and then left the apartment together. After some time, Adrian returned alone. She went to her room, packed a few things, and left again. After that, no one saw her alive again. The roommates did not wake up until the afternoon of June 15. After the party, the apartment was in a chaotic state. Trash, empty bottles, leftover food, broken furniture, and belongings scattered everywhere. While they were cleaning up, they did not immediately notice that Adrian was missing. No one opened her door, assuming she was still asleep. When it became clear that Adrian was not home, the girls did not panic. They assumed she had stayed with Francisco, remembering that they had left the party together. For that reason, no one searched for her for almost 2 days, and no one suspected that something terrible might have happened. Father's Day was celebrated in the United States on June 16. Adrian's father, Rick, expected his daughter to come to him, as she had in previous years. However, she did not appear and did not contact him. Her phone was switched off. Rick became worried and went to the apartment where his daughter lived. Her roommates were surprised to see him and said they had not seen Adrian since Friday. They assumed she had gone home or to Francisco's place. Rick contacted the young man, but Francisco explained that he had not seen Adrian since the party either. Her father immediately reported her missing to the police. The arriving investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events. They had to determine exactly what had happened that night. First, they identified all the party guests and began questioning witnesses. They also searched Adrian's room, where several details immediately caught their attention. The young woman's personal belongings were in the room. Her wallet with bank cards, her driver's license, and her cell phone. This raised questions because her friends claimed she had taken everything with her when she left the apartment again. On the floor next to the nightstand lay the key to her car. Adrian had no spare key, and the car itself was nowhere near the house. Investigators wondered how the car could have disappeared if the only key had remained in the apartment. Suspicion fell on Francisco. He was brought in for questioning. He confirmed that there had indeed been an argument that night, caused by jealousy. According to him, after the argument, they decided to go to his place anyway, but the argument continued in the car. At one point, Adrian asked him to stop and got out. Francisco obeyed and drove away, leaving her alone. Around 3 a.m., Adrian returned to the apartment. The party was still going on, but most of the guests were very drunk, and no one noticed her arrival. During that time, she began repeatedly calling Francisco. Several calls were recorded, but he did not answer. He explained that he had gone to sleep and turned off the ringer on his phone. She also sent him a text message saying that she was coming over. After that, she took some belongings and apparently drove away. However, after about an hour, she returned, left her car keys, phone, and purse in the apartment, changed her clothes, and left again. This time, she disappeared for good. The police reviewed the traffic accidents record from that night. Around 4 a.m., emergency services received a call from a witness reporting a traffic accident. He had seen a white 2002 Mercury Sable lose control, hit a curb, and sustain significant damage. The front tires were blown out and the bumper was damaged. After that, the car suddenly sped away from the scene of the accident. The witness wanted to come and help, but the driver had disappeared. he noted the car's license plate number and gave it to the dispatcher. It later turned out to be Adrian's car. When the official search began, Francisco and Adrian's father searched the surrounding streets. They found the car on a side street not far from the apartment. The vehicle was damaged, the front tires were flat, and the bumper was badly damaged. Everything matched the description from the accident scene. Forensic technicians immediately arrived at the location to examine the car and secure any possible evidence that could help the investigation. However, no traces of blood, signs of a struggle, or foreign fingerprints were found inside the car. The car was locked and secured with an alarm system. Based on all the information gathered, investigators were able to reconstruct the likely sequence of events. There had been a conflict between Adrian and Francisco. Later, they reconciled and drove away together in his car. However, another argument followed on the way, and Adrian got out of the car and decided to walk home. When she returned to the apartment, she tried to contact Francisco but could not reach him. She then decided to drive to his place herself. Being intoxicated, Adrian likely lost control of the vehicle, hit a curb, damaged the car, and fled the scene, possibly fearing that she might lose her driver's license. Toward morning, she returned to the apartment, changed her clothes, but for unknown reasons left all of her personal belongings behind: her phone, documents, and keys. Then she left again. Where did she go without any means of communication? Where she was going remained unclear. The possible connection to Francisco was also examined, but he was soon ruled out as a suspect. He agreed to take a polygraph test, and according to the investigation, he had nothing to do with the disappearance. Before finally leaving the apartment, Adrian tried to call a taxi. The usual services were not working, so she called a small local private taxi company. That was the last outgoing call from her phone. The company belonged to Thomas Simon and his son, Thomas Simon Jr. Both were questioned by police, but they were not initially summoned to the station. Each of them was interviewed by phone. The father was in the office. The son was out driving. When he received the call from law enforcement, he pulled over to the side of the road to take it. Thomas Simon Jr. said the call had indeed come from Adrian. However, he had just finished a previous order. According to him, Adrian agreed to come to a nearby gas station so he could pick her up there. When he arrived, however, the girl was not there. He waited for a while, tried to call her, received no answer, and drove away. This statement was supported by surveillance camera footage from the gas station. The car did indeed pull up there around 4:30 a.m., waited for about 15 minutes, and then drove away without picking anyone up. That evening, police received a call from a woman who had been a passenger in Thomas Simon Jr.'s car earlier that day. She reported that the driver had received a call from police while driving and had pulled over to the side of the road to speak with law enforcement. The woman noticed that the young man appeared visibly tense and very nervous during the phone call. After finishing the call, he got out of the car, opened the trunk, and took out an object that, according to her, resembled a saw. He then got back behind the wheel and drove away. The woman found the driver's behavior strange. When she later learned from the news about the student's disappearance and connected it with the driver's phone call to police, she decided to report the incident to law enforcement. This information raised investigators' suspicions and they decided to question Thomas Simon Jr. personally. A search warrant was also obtained for his car and his home. However, no suspicious items, including a saw, were found during the search. No traces of blood or other evidence were discovered in the car. The suspicions could not be confirmed, and charges were not possible. During questioning, the young man became irritable and refused to cooperate. He refused to answer some questions and declined a polygraph test. Despite his behavior, no direct evidence was found linking him to Adrian's disappearance. The investigation gradually reached a dead end. No new evidence appeared. Witnesses had nothing more to report, and the girl's whereabouts remained unknown. Hope of finding her alive gradually faded. A month after her disappearance, in July 2013, a severe monsoon storm with torrential rain and thunderstorms struck Arizona. On July 21, widespread flooding occurred in the eastern part of the Phoenix area. Washes and streams overflowed, carrying debris and objects with them. The flooding was among the most serious in years. On August 6, 2013, as the water had receded, a resident was walking his dog in the flood-affected area. While searching through the area, he came across human remains. He immediately reported the discovery to police, believing it might be the body of a drowning victim. The remains were sent to a forensic laboratory for identification and examination. Medical examiners concluded that death had occurred more than a month earlier. The remains belonged to a young woman, and because of clear signs of previous surgical intervention, particularly the absence of part of a lung, investigators suspected they might belong to Adrian, who had disappeared in June. This assumption was later confirmed by DNA analysis. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be determined. Experts were also unable to determine whether the victim had been subjected to physical or sexual violence. No foreign DNA was found on the body. One injury drew particular attention. Part of the left hand was missing. This damage was so severe that investigators could not determine whether it had been caused by an instrument or whether it had occurred because of water movement during the flood. The remains were found approximately 30 miles from where Adrian had last been seen. Considering the movement of floodwater, investigators suggested that the body may have been carried away by the current. The original location of the body before it was moved by water could not be determined. Although the area was searched with dogs, no additional clues or personal belongings belonging to Adrian were found. The cause of death remained undetermined. No gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or cutting injuries were found on the body. The case stalled once again. Due to the lack of new information, the investigation went cold. However, almost 2 years after Adrian's disappearance, a man named Keen Azariah contacted police. He explained that he suspected his acquaintance, Brian Patrick Miller, of being connected to the young woman's death. Miller was known in certain circles by the nickname Zombie Hunter. Although he was over 50 at the time, he actively participated in events such as Comic-Con, themed parties, and cosplay festivals. He often appeared in the same outfit, which over the years had become his recognizable alter ego. He even customized his car in the style of zombie movies, with artificial damage and fake bloodstains. In everyday life, Brian behaved quietly and cautiously. In public, however, he presented himself as a noticeable and active figure. while at the same time leaving a disturbing impression. In early 2015, Miller became a suspect in a murder case that had occurred more than 2 decades earlier. In 1992, 22-year-old Angela Brasso disappeared. Her body was later found in a canal with signs of violence, and her head had been removed. In 1993, 17-year-old Melanie Bernas disappeared. She too was found dead near the Arizona Canal. Signs of violence were found on her body. At the time, the killer could not be identified. Although biological material had been taken from the victims' bodies, no match was found in the DNA database. Only years later, with advances in technology, was it determined that both crimes had been committed by the same person. The identity remained unknown until 2015, when investigators connected the evidence to Brian Patrick Miller through DNA and forensic genealogy. This is how Miller came to the attention of investigators in the old canal murder cases. Keen Azaria, who had known Miller for many years, kept a personal diary. When he learned that the cold cases had resurfaced, he began analyzing his notes and the events of the past several years. He discovered that Brian Patrick Miller had been present at an event at Adrian's home on the night she disappeared. Miller had posted photos from that event on social media, including the location. The time frame matched the period during which Adrian was last seen, so it was possible that they could have crossed paths by chance. It also emerged that Miller had connections to the area, near where Adrian's remains were later found. The information provided by Kani A. Azaria was interesting, but it required careful verification. Miller's home was searched several times, but it proved almost impossible to find anything useful there. His entire residence resembled a junkyard. Every room was packed with all kinds of items, from books, records, and comic book costumes to broken furniture and appliances that he had dragged into the home over the years, intending to repair them or turn them into something useful. Despite this, nothing was found that connected Brian Patrick Miller to Adrian's death. The suspect categorically denied any involvement in the young woman's disappearance or possible death, claiming that he had never seen her, even though some elements of the crimes appeared disturbing and similar. It was not until April 2023 that Brian Patrick Miller's case went to trial. He was found guilty of murdering Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas. In June 2023, he was sentenced to death for those murders. Miller was also suspected in connection with another disappearance, but because there was not enough evidence, he was not convicted in that case. Adrian's case never went to trial. Due to the lack of solid evidence, since no one has been charged, and in recent years there have been no suspects, no new witnesses, and no significant leads. This crime remains unsolved, one of the most mysterious and darkest stories in the history of Phoenix. Thank you for watching, and please take care. 30-year-old Kira K. Steger worked at a clothing store in the Mall of America. She loved her job and almost never missed a shift. When she failed to show up for work on February 23, 2013, her coworkers became worried. They tried calling Kira, but she did not answer their calls or messages. Soon after, her disappearance was reported to the police. Kira Steger was born on November 19, 1982, in Des Plaines, Illinois. She was the daughter of Marcy and Jay Steger, who described her as a cheerful, loyal, and kind young woman. Kira worked at stores in the Mall of America. Her co-workers were not just good friends to her. She considered them almost like family. She had an amazing ability to see strengths in other people that she could not always see in herself. She had big plans for the future, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. But all of her dreams were shattered in an instant when Kira mysteriously appeared after Thursday, February 21, 2013. She was scheduled to work that week. Her colleagues said she had been in good spirits and had planned to go out with her husband after work. Kira Steger and Jeffrey Trevino had met years earlier. They connected quickly. Their relationship developed and eventually led to marriage. From the outside, they seemed like a happy and strong couple. Of course, they had arguments, but only they knew about them. Neither relatives, friends, nor colleagues noticed anything seriously wrong. But 2 days later, on Saturday, February 23, Kira did not show up for work. This made her colleagues suspicious. Such behavior was completely out of character for her. She was always punctual, disciplined, and careful about following her schedule. Unable to reach Kira, her colleagues contacted Jeffrey, but he also claimed he did not know where his wife was. According to Jeffrey, Kira had left the house the previous morning and had not returned. He did not seem overly concerned. Apparently, Kira had sometimes stayed away for a day or two. She would sleep at a friend's house or drive to visit relatives without warning. The only thing that could have caused concern was the bad weather that day. It was snowing heavily, and the roads were dangerously slippery. Jeffrey suggested that something might have happened to her on the way. Perhaps her car had broken down, and her cell phone battery had died. When he still had not heard from his wife, Jeffrey reported her missing and contacted Kira's family. For her family, this disappearance came as a complete shock and a devastating blow. After receiving the missing person report for Kira Steger, investigators immediately began their work. As is standard procedure in such cases, the investigation began with interviewing the husband and examining the immediate neighborhood. Investigators went to Jeffrey's house to speak with him. He explained that he and Kira had planned to spend time together on Thursday. They had dinner, talked, went bowling, and then left the mall. According to him, they went straight home because Kira wanted to watch a movie. Jeffrey also told investigators that his wife had left the house the following Friday morning around 8:30 a.m. She supposedly had an appointment where her attendance was required. She had been acting normally, and he had not noticed anything unusual. Jeffrey did not find it unusual that Kira had disappeared, even though he claimed he did not know where she was or who she was spending time with. According to him, they had been having relationship problems in recent months, but he did not think they were serious. They were just minor disagreements, the kind that happen in any marriage. Investigators asked Jeffrey where Kira might have been staying and whether she had a lover. He denied this, saying that he had personally asked Kira and that she had told him no. He said he truly loved and trusted his wife. Investigators passed all the information they had gathered about Kira and her car to patrol officers. They then went to the Mall of America to verify Jeffrey's statements and possibly find new leads. The Mall of America is one of the largest shopping malls in the world. It is located in Bloomington and contains numerous stores, theme parks, an aquarium, cinemas, a golf course, and much more. Not surprisingly, a shopping center as large as the Mall of America was full of security cameras. Knowing when Kira had left work on February 21, investigators reviewed the footage from that time. There was nothing suspicious on the video. Jeffrey's words were confirmed. He had indeed met Kira after work. They walked around the mall for a while, then went down to the parking lot and drove away. There was no argument between them. The evening appeared to pass quietly, but there is nothing worse than simply waiting without knowing what is happening. With each passing day, concern for Kira's life grew. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, her family came to Bloomington to help with the investigation. They printed flyers with photos of Kira, posted them on poles, and handed them out to people passing by. Their goal was simple: to draw as much attention as possible to the search. They knew they could not just stand by. They had to do everything they could to find their loved one. While Kira's family took care of the flyers, investigators continued their work. While interviewing the couple's neighbors, police noticed a security camera on one of the houses. It rotated from side to side, and in one position, it showed Jeffrey and Kira's home. Investigators asked the owner to copy the recordings in case they contained a clue. Meanwhile, data came in from the cell phone provider, and investigators found a new lead. According to call and text message records, Kira had another man in her life besides Jeffrey. His name was Ryan Wendt, a manager connected to the store where Kira worked. They had a close relationship and texted each other constantly. Police discovered that Ryan was in another state at the time of Kira's disappearance. He was traveling through Colorado. He became a key figure in the investigation. First, he was having an affair with Kira, and second, he had left town at the exact time she vanished. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, or perhaps not. Investigators needed to find out. In any case, they managed to contact Ryan, and he agreed to speak with investigators. During questioning, he revealed that the last time he had communicated with Kira was while he was driving through South Dakota. They had exchanged messages shortly before the young woman disappeared. After checking the timestamps of the messages, investigators realized that Kira had been communicating with her lover while having dinner with her husband. Her messages clearly indicated that she was emotionally moving away from Jeffrey. Investigators tracked Ryan's location using cell tower data and examined his banking records. It turned out that he was indeed far away that evening and could not have been physically involved in Kira's disappearance. He was removed from the list of suspects. Meanwhile, another group of investigators reviewed the footage from the neighbor's house. The Perfect Advent gift is available on Amazon. Link in the description. The camera covered much of the street by panning left and right, but it moved too quickly. Whenever an investigator spotted something suspicious, the camera immediately turned in another direction. Jeffrey and Kira's house was visible only for a few seconds at a time. Jeffrey claimed that he and Kira had driven home after dinner and bowling, watched a movie, and then gone to sleep. However, the footage showed Kira's car backing out of the driveway sometime after 2:00 a.m. Due to the poor video quality and the camera's constant movement, it was difficult to determine exactly what had happened. But soon, the car drove away. Jeffrey explained that Kira had asked him to fill up her car before work and that he had driven to the gas station. Surprisingly, This turned out to be true. He was indeed seen at the gas station around 3 a.m. Investigators discovered that, for some reason, after filling up the car, Jeffrey did not drive straight home, but headed toward the highway. His exact destination remained a mystery. The neighbor's camera did not record his return, but this could have been a coincidence because the camera was constantly rotating. Theoretically, he could have returned later when the camera was facing another direction. Upon further examination of the footage, investigators determined that Kira's Chevrolet had driven away from the house at around 9:21 a.m. Unfortunately, it was impossible to identify who was behind the wheel. The missing person report for Kira was filed after she failed to appear for work again. On Monday, February 25th, police received a call about a suspicious car near the shopping center where she worked. Security guards in the parking garage noticed the car, which had been parked there for several days, and called a tow truck. Before towing the car, the tow truck driver inspected it and saw strange red stains around the trunk. He immediately called the police. It was Kira's white Chevrolet. There was only a small amount of blood, just a few stains, but the mere fact that it was there suggested something serious. In Kira's bag, found in the abandoned car, were divorce documents printed from the internet. Investigators also noticed a dark object in the snow behind the car. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a rolled-up trunk liner. Dark stains were visible on it. DNA analysis confirmed that it was Kira Steger's blood. Investigators sadly concluded that Kira was most likely no longer alive. This horrifying discovery was a devastating blow to her family and friends. Their last hope of ever seeing her alive again was gone. At the same time, countless questions surfaced in the minds of her loved ones. How had she died? Had she suffered? And who could have hated her so much that they would take her life? The absence of Kira's body only made the situation worse. The grief, without the possibility of saying goodbye, was even harder to bear. Now, the investigators' main task was to determine who had left the car in the parking lot. The car had driven away from the house around 9:21 a.m. and was captured on the mall's security cameras about 20 to 30 minutes later. There were no cameras in the exact parking area where the car was found, but one camera had filmed the drive there. When investigators reviewed the footage, they noticed that a hooded man appeared in the frame just minutes after the white Chevrolet had pulled into the parking lot. Because it was cold outside, the hood itself did not immediately raise suspicion. But investigators decided to trace his movements. It turned out that this man crossed the street, walked to the taxi stand, spoke to one of the drivers, and then drove away. Police quickly identified the company operating the taxis at the mall. Thanks to GPS trackers in the vehicles, they were able to determine the license plate of the cab the unknown man had used. It emerged that the man had gotten out just one block from Kira and Jeffrey's house and had paid in cash. As the taxi drove away, it was captured again by the same camera that also had a partial view of the couple's house. 2 minutes later, another hooded man appeared in the frame. Due to the poor image quality, his face was difficult to see, but the white logo on his hoodie was clearly visible. Investigators continued reviewing the video and saw this man enter the house where Kira and Jeffrey lived. Given the circumstances, there was almost no doubt that the person hiding under the hood was Jeffrey. After obtaining a search warrant, Police officers went to the house. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but upon closer inspection, forensic technicians found dark red stains in the couple's bedroom. Some stains were on the wall next to the bed, and many more were on the mattress. It was obvious that the room had recently been rearranged and cleaned. When experts treated the floor and carpet with luminol, they literally glowed. There were numerous blood stains on them that were invisible to the naked eye. The blood trails started in the bedroom and continued through other areas of the house. Testing confirmed that it was Kira's blood. Now investigators had no more doubts. Kira Steger was dead. Police searched not only the house, but also Jeffrey's car. Although they found no traces of blood or signs of a struggle inside, they did discover something interesting: a gas station receipt. The receipt had been issued before Kira's car was parked at the shopping center. According to the receipt, the payment had been made with Jeffrey's card. Investigators reviewed security camera footage from that gas station. The video showed Jeffrey filling up the car, getting inside, and withdrawing cash from the ATM. Most importantly, the footage clearly showed his face and the logo on the chest of his jacket, matching the hooded man in the earlier footage. This evidence was enough to arrest 39-year-old Jeffrey Trevino. During questioning, he immediately called his lawyer and refused to make a statement. The police had enough evidence, but the most important piece of evidence, Kira's body, had still not been found. Everyone was certain the young woman was dead. The police, her family, and numerous volunteers searched for her for months. In March, as the snow began to melt, a strange bag was found near Keller Lake, a few kilometers from Trevino's house. Inside were a blood-stained pillow, a shirt, and a bra. Testing confirmed that the items belonged to Kira. The lake was still frozen, which made the search difficult. Divers examined the bottom, but found nothing. Later, dogs searched the shoreline, also without success. On May 8, 2013, more than 2 months after her disappearance, the St. Paul Police Department received a disturbing phone call. A man reported seeing what appeared to be a body in the Mississippi River. When it was recovered, dental records confirmed that it was Kira Steger. Traces of a severe blow were discovered on her forehead, and the index finger on her left hand was broken. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be determined. After gathering all the evidence, investigators reconstructed a rough timeline of events. When Kira and Jeffrey arrived home, he noticed that his wife was texting someone. When she refused to show substitutions, Jeffrey forcibly took her phone, breaking her finger in the process. After seeing the romantic messages, he killed Kira in a fit of rage and then tried to cover up the crime. He transported the body in the trunk of her car to the river and dumped it in the water. Along the way, he discarded a bag containing blood-stained belongings. In the morning, he withdrew cash to pay for a taxi. He then abandoned his wife's car at the mall and returned home. He spent the rest of the day carefully cleaning the house to make it appear airy, as if Kira had left voluntarily that morning. However, thanks to security cameras, his plan failed. In October 2013, the court found 39-year-old Jeffrey Trevino guilty. The jury agreed that the murder had not been premeditated, but had instead happened during an attack connected to rage over his wife's affair and her desire to leave the marriage. Before the sentence was announced, Kira's family members spoke in court. Her sister, Carrie Ann Steger, said that Jeffrey was a monster, a calculated criminal, and deserved no mercy. Her mother, Marcy, said that he had shown her daughter no mercy and had thrown her into the river like trash. Her father, Jay, said that no matter what sentence Jeffrey received, it would never ease their pain. In November 2013, Jeffrey Trevino was sentenced to 27.5 years in prison. He will not be eligible for release until 2031. Thank you for watching, and please take care.